Picture this: a steel boat, 80 feet long, somewhere in the middle of the Bering Sea. The nearest land is over 200 miles away. The nearest hospital is a Coast Guard helicopter that may or may not be able to fly tonight. It is 3 in the morning. The deck outside is sheeted in ice. Waves the size of 2-story houses are slamming into the hull every few seconds, hard enough to knock a grown man off his feet. And down below, in a cramped bunk at the very front of the boat, a man is fast asleep. Not pretending, not lying there terrified. Actually asleep. Deeply. While the entire world around him is trying to kill him. Here is the thing most people never even consider. A commercial fisherman does not go home at the end of his shift. There is no end of his shift. He lives out there for days, sometimes for weeks. And everything you take for granted, a bed that does not move, a hot shower, a plate of food that stays on the table, becomes a problem that has to be engineered, rationed, and survived. There are 3 layers to this story. The first is how they sleep when the ocean will not let them. The second is how they stay clean when fresh water is more valuable than fuel. And the third is something almost nobody expects about the most important person on the entire boat. By the end of this video, you will never look at a piece of fish on your plate the same way again. So let us start with the one that sounds the easiest and turns out to be the hardest. Sleep. On land, sleep is simple. You lie down, you close your eyes, you wake up in roughly the same position. On a fishing boat, none of that is true. The boat never stops moving. Even in calm weather, it rolls, it pitches, it shudders. In rough weather, it does all 3 at once violently for hours. And here's the cruel part. The place where the crew sleeps is almost always in the bow, the very front of the boat, in a space old sailors call the forecastle. Why does that matter? Because the bow is the part of the boat that moves the most. When the vessel climbs a wave and crashes down the other side, the front end travels the farthest and hits the hardest. So the crew is sleeping in the single worst spot for motion on the entire vessel. Every slam, every drop, every shudder, they feel it amplified. And that creates a very real, very physical problem. How do you stay in a bed that's being thrown around like a carnival ride? The answer is a piece of gear so simple it's almost funny. It's called a lee cloth. It's basically a strip of heavy canvas or a board that runs along the open side of the bunk and gets tied or wedged into place. When the boat rolls hard, that cloth is the only thing stopping a sleeping man from being launched straight out of bed and onto the floor or into the bunk across from him. Without it, you don't sleep. You brace all night. And a fisherman who doesn't sleep is a fisherman who gets hurt the next day. But staying in the bunk is only half the battle. Because here's what surprises most people. On a working boat, the crew almost never sleeps at the same time. The boat runs on something called a watch system. The work, hauling gear, processing the catch, steering the boat, watching the radar never stops, 24 hours a day. So the crew splits into rotations, 6 hours on, 6 hours off, sometimes 4 and 4, which means a fisherman might get woken up at 2 a.m. to work until 8, sleep until noon, then be back on deck again. Your body never settles into a normal rhythm. You learn to fall asleep instantly in full daylight in a roaring steel box because the moment your head hits the pillow, the clock is already counting down to the next watch. And the most experienced guys, they can be dead asleep in under a minute. They have to be, because rest isn't a luxury out there. It's fuel, and it runs out faster than you think. Now, if sleeping out there is hard, the next one is where things get genuinely strange. Because on a fishing boat, the most precious thing on board isn't the fish, and it isn't the fuel, It's fresh water. Think about it. You're hundreds of miles from shore, completely surrounded by water, and you can't drink a drop of it. Salt water will dehydrate you and destroy your equipment. So every gallon of fresh water on board has to either be carried out from port in tanks or made from scratch. And carrying it is heavy, expensive, and takes up space you'd rather fill with catch. So how do you shower for 2 weeks on a boat that can't refill? For a long time the answer was brutal. You didn't, really, you rationed. And here's where you meet one of the most underrated pieces of technology on a modern boat. It's called the water maker, and what it does sounds almost like science fiction. It takes raw seawater and forces it under enormous pressure through a membrane so fine that the salt molecules physically can't pass through. The process is called reverse osmosis. What comes out the other side is clean, drinkable fresh water made on demand from the ocean itself. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. A water maker runs on power, and power runs on fuel, and the system can only produce so much per hour. So even with one on board, fresh water is never unlimited. It's budgeted. Drinking and cooking come first. Always. Showering comes dead last. Which is why fishermen have perfected something the military calls a Navy shower. The rules are simple and merciless. You turn the water on for about 10 seconds, just enough to get wet. Then you shut it off completely. You soap up and scrub down, and the water stays off the entire time. Then you turn it back on for maybe 30 seconds to rinse, and you're done. A full shower can use less than 3 gallons of water. A normal shower back home uses more than 17. And on the toughest boats in the worst weather, even that is a luxury you might skip for days. You get used to it. Everyone smells the same, so nobody notices. The work doesn't stop for hygiene. And when you finally do get that 10-second blast of warm, fresh water after 4 days on deck in the freezing spray, guys will tell you it's one of the best feelings of the entire trip. So they've solved sleep. They've solved water. Which brings us to the third layer, and the one almost nobody sees coming. Because the single most important person on a fishing boat, the one who can make or break the entire trip, isn't who you'd guess. It's the cook. Here's why. A commercial fisherman doing hard deck work in cold weather burns an absolutely staggering number of calories. We're talking 4,000, 5,000, even 6,000 calories a day, double or triple what an average person needs. The body is fighting the cold, the constant motion, and brutal physical labor all at once. If that crew isn't fed properly, they don't just get hungry, they get slow, they get clumsy, they get hurt. On a boat, a tired, underfed crew is a dangerous crew. So food isn't just food out there, it's morale, it's safety. It's the thing that holds the whole operation together when everyone is exhausted and the weather has been bad for a week. A good cook is worth their weight in gold, and the crew knows it. But cooking on a boat that won't stop moving creates its own impossible problem. How do you keep a pot of boiling water on a stove when the entire kitchen is tilting 45 degrees? The answer is a clever piece of engineering called a gimbaled stove. Instead of being bolted down rigid, the stove is mounted so it can swing freely and stay roughly level even as the boat rolls underneath it. And the tables and counters have raised edges, little wooden rails called fiddles that stop plates and pans from sliding off and flying across the galley. And still, in really heavy seas, the cook is fighting gravity the entire time, bracing against the counter with one hip, holding a pot with one hand, working with the other. Meals get simpler when the weather gets worse. Sometimes it's a one-pot stew that can survive being thrown around. Sometimes when it's really bad, it's just sandwiches eaten standing up, wedged into a corner so you don't get launched across the room. Now here's what surprises people the most. Ask a fisherman who's done it for years whether all of this, the broken sleep, the rationed water, the meals eaten braced against a wall in a storm, amounts to misery. And a lot of them will tell you no, because out there after the gear is set and the work is done, there's a kind of quiet you can't find anywhere on land. No phones, no traffic, no noise except the engine and the sea, just a small crew, a warm galley, hot food, and nothing in any direction but ocean and sky. The men who keep going back say it's the closest thing to true peace they've ever felt, and the worst conditions, the hardest trips, almost always turn into the stories they tell for the rest of their lives. So the next time you see a piece of fish on your plate, remember this. Somebody slept strapped into a bunk in a freezing storm to catch it. Somebody showered in 10 seconds of borrowed water, and somebody cooked a hot meal for the whole crew while the floor tried to throw them across the room. Now I want to hear from you. Could you do it? 2 weeks at sea, broken sleep, 10-second showers, no land in sight. Let me know down in the comments. And if you have ever worked on a boat, tell us your roughest trip. I read every single one. If you learned something today, hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'll see you on the next one.